Okay, good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for all coming out this evening for the inaugural lecture of the Torah Party platform. All right, we've just come off the back of an election, and we have a very polarized, divided electorate. So it's a little too politically charged to even go through some of these issues from a Jewish perspective in the midst of election season, because people then start to accuse you of being political. Well, you're only saying that, you're twisting the Torah's message to suit your political agenda. So it's apropos that we start something like this after all the dust has somewhat settled, and at least there's been a decision that has been made. Some of you will be happy, some of you not happy, but either way, the decision has been made by the American people, and now we can really grapple with what does the Torah say about the issues without feeling that anybody has an agenda in saying so. I will say, the Shabbos before the elections, I gave a lecture in a shul in New Jersey, and I like to pride myself. I'm a political scientist, and I teach at Torah University, and I like to pride myself on the fact that my students can't pin me down. They don't know what my politics are, because my job as a political scientist, I believe, is to give them a sense of what both sides feel. And so I mentioned that, excuse me, at the, and so, I'm also not an American citizen, so I actually didn't vote, but as a green card holder, permanent resident, I could still donate. So I mentioned it to my students, and it kind of went over their heads. I mentioned it at the lecture in this shul the other week, and they're like, "You do realize, Rabbi Friedman, that your ballot is secret, but your donations are public knowledge." So much for that. Okay, so everybody's going to go Googling this evening. I don't know how quickly things appear, but I will say, of 4 different campaigns that I donated to, and I do tell my students this, of 4 different campaigns that I donated to, 2 were Republican, 2 were Democrat. It's important, I feel, that we look at what the particular races are, and so that's where I come from a political standpoint, and hopefully we can, I give you that foreknowledge to know that I hope that I'm not giving you politics this evening. I'm giving you pure Torah, and that's where this is from. Because especially when it came to something like abortion, it was very politically charged, with certainly allegations on either side of where the parties stood. I think if you look at the platforms, they weren't as far apart as some people would have thought. But before we even go there, I'm a political scientist, but I was once a law student. I'm a law school dropout. And for many years I would tell people, once I was doing my PhD, I says, I hope when I get my PhD that my mother will eventually forgive me for dropping out of law school. And I never actually had the conversation with my mother. It was just kind of something, cute that I like to say. And then when I got my PhD, I called up my mother in Australia. I says, "Emma, I got my PhD, and I've been telling people for years that when I finally get my PhD, you will forgive me for being a law school dropout. So Emma, do you forgive me?" And she replies, "No comment." But when I was in law school, one of the courses that I took at the University of New South Wales in Australia was a course delivered by Rabbi Selwyn Franklin. I think we'll go to South Africa and Cape Town, maybe even. But he was a rabbi in Sydney, Australia, at Central Synagogue for many years. And he was an adjunct professor in the law school. He and Rabbi Raymond Apple of the Great Synagogue, Alav Shalom, they shared this Talmudic law course. And Rabbi Franklin opened the course with a conference that he'd recently been at with other clergy members on IVF. And he says, I sat there with the priest and the minister and other faith leaders, faith representatives, and they offered their feelings on the issue and whether ethically it felt right or felt that this was not what God wanted. And then when it was my turn, I gave them source sheets. I said to them, that's not how we work in Judaism. It doesn't work on feelings. We have a great literature of thousands of years that all of our decisions today are based on precedent. Yes, they didn't have IVF in the time of the Talmud, but they had other things that would lead us and point us in the direction so that we can establish what is permissible, what is not permissible, who the birth mother is, whether it's a surrogate mother. All of these things are based on principles that have been established throughout these centuries and millennia. And so when we look at abortions, or we look at any of the issues, we look at it through a prism of Torah that goes back all the way back to Sinai. And we just have to see where it fits in. Obviously, abortion is not a new concept, but it has certainly come to the fore in Judaism in recent years in ways that we didn't necessarily see. We did start to see the past couple of centuries, but before that, not so much. You don't find it as a major discussion in Talmudic times, but we will see the Talmudic principles that come into play. But to begin with, this is shul, and shul, not only so this is halacha, we're learning Jewish law, but we also know that we always work around our parsha cycle. And so this week's Parshas Vayera, we have the angels that come and visit Abraham and Sarah and promise them, Sarah who's been barren, pushing 90, a child. And she's sitting there in the tent laughing. This is ridiculous. These people say, I'm going to have a child. Well, she doesn't say that. She says, look at my husband, Abraham, pushing 100. He's going to have a child. Of course, when God reports it back, it's like she said, he wanted to make sure that they still had shalom bias. She wasn't making fun of her husband. She was making fun of herself. But either way, this is what's happening in the parsha. And I bring this as an intro because one of the things that we have to think about as Jews, as a rabbi, is, we jump straight into a conversation about abortion and we forget the pain and suffering of people sitting there listening, saying, abortion? I've been trying for years to have a child. And you're just making this like it's cheap, right? Oh yeah, if you want, you can have an abortion. Think of the sensitivity. And so that's the first thing that we have to think about when we have a conversation like this. Our hearts go out to those who are looking to have a child and yearning, longing for a child, and our blessing is that very soon God endows them with the child that they've been praying for. The other thing that's important to note is that often also gets lost in the mix in terms of sensitivities, is that when we talk about things like my body, my choice, sometimes we fail to recognize that in the case of abortion, it's not only being the choice of the pregnant woman. Sometimes, unfortunately, more times than should be the case, it's husbands, boyfriends, even fathers, mothers, friends who have pushed them in that direction. And so the notion of choice also we have to be very careful and sensitive about when we think, because whether a person was pushed in a direction or even made a decision on their own, sometimes there's also guilt that remains for many years, and we just have to we should be a lot more sensitive when we're talking about these things so that it just doesn't become, it's just parlance, we can just throw around words, right? Abortion is a big deal. Right? Whether we land that it's permissible or it's not permissible, it has huge gravity that we need to be aware of and think about, and not just think, it's just another issue of legalize marijuana, legalize abortion. No, that it runs much deeper. All right, so off the bat, we are going to have issues in Judaism where it becomes a real halachic question when it comes to abortion, when it comes to whether the fetus is a person or not. Think, for example, Shabbos. Right? So the fetus is in danger. we know that we're allowed to break Shabbos to save a life. So, is this a life? Is this not a life? And that's going to make a difference. If this is a person, then yeah, we have to break Shabbos. And if it's not a person and the mother's life's not in danger, which only the baby's in danger, then we can't break Shabbos. So this is going to have fundamental ramifications on a practical, weekly basis. Right? It's not just something we're thinking about academically. This is something with practical consequences. We need to know, what's the status of this thing or person? So it begins, the Talmud tells us in Sanhedrin 47b, like I say, it's not a new concept, it just is dealt with, but not in a deep way, the way that we think about it today. But already in the Talmud, it says that we did not terminate a pregnancy based on a verse in Parashat Noach. And then when I say we don't, we're going to give that a lot more nuance as we go along. But the basic starting point, jumping off point, because it's never going to be we don't. It's going to be when and when not. Right? So the basic starting point that we should know is the verse in Parashat Noach, we read a couple of weeks ago, that talks about murder. So Noach comes out of the ark, Noach and his wife and 3 sons and daughters-in-law, and they are told, don't murder. We have these 7 Noahide laws. Don't murder, because the world was filled with violence before then, and now they are permitted to eat meat. People kind of just looked at human beings, animals, is all the same. We were vegetarian until the flood. My 14-year-old Ella Bracha likes to remind me constantly she's a strict vegetarian, and she says, this is how it's meant to be. But our sages tell us that the reason that meat, the animals, became permissible to human beings afterwards was in order to draw a distinction between killing people, killing animals, that it's not all the same level. But when that's spelt out to Noach and his family, the verse says, Shafech dam ha'adam, ba'adam damo yishafech. It almost feels like it's a poem that works both ways. One who spills the blood of a person, ba'adam damo yishafech, in the person, the blood will be spilled. But from this weird construction, the Talmud derives that when do we see shofech dam ha'adam, spilling the blood of a person, ba'adam, in a person, just read it like that without the final clause, we see spilling the blood of a person inside a person. What is that? That's a fetus. So from here, the Talmud derives our basic premise, starting point, that this life in there that cannot be terminated. Again, it's going to be but, caveats to it, but this is where the starting point for it. Because any time when we're judging where things fit, I guess, along the totem pole, the best way to look at it is to compare to other situations where we would say it's murder. So far we didn't say it's murder, we said you can't do it. So if you can't do it, what is it then? Is it murder? It's not murder. Tosfos, the medieval commentators in France, kind of known as Rashi's grandchildren, they're talking 11th, 12th century. Some of them were even in England. There were Tosfos in England prior to the expulsion. So Tosfos comment that it can't be murder, because murder, we know that the punishment for murder is capital punishment. And the punishment for abortion has never been capital punishment. No, there's no source for that in the Talmud. So we have to conclude that while it is forbidden, according to the Talmud, it's not murder, it's something else. So I gave you some examples there. The example given by Tosfos is what we call a treifa. That sounds like sounds like a heavy-handed word, because we think treif means not kosher. Strictly speaking, treif means an animal. So after an animal is slaughtered, the full name of a shochet is a shochet ubodek. Sometimes you see shin, vav, 2 dashes, and a bet. It's an abbreviation for that's what their title is. Shin, vav, bet, shochet ubodek. They slaughter and they check, because after a shochet has has slaughtered the animal, he then needs to check the innards to see that it was a healthy animal. And generally, if it doesn't pass the test, then it's sold to the non-kosher market. What's the test? Well, there are certain signs that you have to identify to know healthy means that it would have survived for 12 months beyond had I not slaughtered the animal. Right? So if it wouldn't have survived 12 months, that then renders it treif. We use that word to mean anything not kosher, but strictly speaking, technically, treif means something an animal that wouldn't have survived 12 months. Now, when we start thinking about glatt kosher or bet yosef versus regular kosher, that has to do with this, because when you pull out the insides of an animal, there are varying degrees as to how much we err on the side of caution or not. And that's where we get to glatt kosher or not glatt kosher. But that has to do with this treif within the 12 months. So I say that it sounds heavy-handed, and I give you all the background as to what treif really means, because in halacha we also use the same word for people. If somebody is dying, and I pull the plug, where, let's say they chose euthanasia. There's this pod now in Switzerland. Some American went there and took their own life. It's illegal here. I think even the pod might be not, even though assisted dying is legal in Switzerland and other countries, but this pod system has not been, I don't know, FDA approved, whatever happens over there in Switzerland. But Tosfos compares the termination of a fetus to the law of a treifa with a human being. If you terminate a life of somebody who is dying, it's not capital punishment. It's forbidden, right? Euthanasia is forbidden, but it's not in the same category. It's not considered murder. In other words, what do we see? There's a thing called killing. It's not murder, right? So those are things on the negative side. Certainly on the positive side, we know there's killing that's not murder. Right? For example, self-defense, war, capital punishment administered by the courts. Right? You've killed somebody in all of these cases. Have you committed a crime? Was it murder? It wasn't murder, and it wasn't a crime. It was not only permissible in those cases, it was something that you had to do. So on the flip side, right, God creates everything in equilibrium. There is a category that is not murder, but it's still forbidden. So Tosfos places abortion in the same category as euthanasia, basically. Forbidden, but not on the level of murder, because were it on the level of murder, the punishment would be capital punishment, and that's not the case. So the first thing that we need to know at this stage for ourselves is Christians, Catholics, evangelicals, who want to equate abortion with murder, that's definitely not our position. That's not our position. How do we know that? Well, we know that even according to the strictest opinion in Judaism, there wouldn't be capital punishment, so it can't be murder. Right? Even those who say it's almost never permitted, and we'll get to the spectrum in traditional Orthodox thought, but even at the end of the spectrum, it's not murder, and so it's not capital punishment, therefore it's not murder. So what is it? So certain times, the Talmud says, it is not only permissible, it is obligatory. What is that case? So it's a Mishnah in Tractate Ohalos that says that a woman who is in dire straits as she's giving birth, what we call makasha leleid. So it sounds a little gory, but the way it's described, the way it's called in the Talmud, chatkin osay avarin, we can take out the baby limb by limb. In other words, we can terminate the pregnancy. Right? If the woman's life, the mother is in danger, then we terminate pregnancy. Why? Because what we call, and we'll see this in the next slide, we have a concept called chayecha kodmin. The Talmud says your life takes precedence over someone else's. Now the Talmud then qualifies and says once the baby has left the womb, or has entered the world outside of the mother, even just part of the baby, the head, at that point, it's not equal, and we don't terminate the baby in favor of the mother. So we need to really break down why is that, what's happening, what is the structure, the framework as to how that works, and why it should be allowed, not allowed. So the first concept, chayecha kodmin, your life comes first. The Talmud talks about wandering through the wilderness. You and a friend, you have your flask of water with you, and you know that that flask of water is only going to last you to get to the nearest stream of drinking water. But your friend is with you. So you say like this, should I split the flask of water with my friend? If I split the flask of water with my friend, chances are neither of us will make it. If I drink it all for myself, isn't that a little selfish? So it's a debate in the Talmud, Rabbi Akiva, the law is like Rabbi Akiva, who says, chayecha kodmin, your life comes first, and so you don't split the water. Better that you survive and the other person doesn't. So based on this principle, and you should know this had, this idea of chayecha kodmin came up a lot, unfortunately, during COVID. And questions of who should be treated first. We had anybody that's been in the emergency room knows that these are complicated questions, and it's not as simple as saying, or somebody who's sicker, or somebody who is healthier, or somebody who has more chances. There is a bit of a survival of the fittest notion in Judaism in terms of chayecha kodmin. Obviously, you're not allowed to actively shorten anybody else's life, but you shouldn't necessarily be putting somebody else ahead of the queue because you think, that's a young person who has, no, you have to look out for number one in certain cases. So this is the principle, though, on which the Talmud or the Mishnah in Ohalos bases the fact that if the baby is threatening the life of the mother, then we terminate the baby, because chayecha kodmin, her life comes first, and she has the ability to do so because he or she, the baby, is threatening her life. The second way of understanding this is, so we look into the medieval commentators on this section of the Talmud, and they debate, they actually give different explanations for the methodology that's happening here. Why it is that we save the mother and terminate the baby. So Rashi says, 12th century, 11th century France, says until the baby emerged, this is his words, he's commenting on the Talmud, lav nefesh hu. It's not a person, it's not a soul. Right? Nefesh can be used interchangeably. Sometimes it means a soul, but it's also like when we say in English, so many wonderful souls here this evening. We don't mean a bunch of spirits in the room, we mean the people. Right? So when Rashi there says lav nefesh hu, it's not a nefesh, it means it's not a person. Right? That's why at that point you could terminate because the mother is a person, but the baby's not a person. Right? Powerful. Contrast that with the Rambam. Right? Rambam, of course, began in Spain, ended up in Morocco, then a little time in Israel, then Egypt. Rambam says that no, we're dealing with the question and issue of rodef. Rodef means self-defense. If somebody is pursuing another, there's some weird scene, somebody pursuing a car chase, I guess from Fast and Furious. Apparently it's one of the best scenes. I've never seen it, but so somebody's pursuing another and want to kill them. So the law of rodef is the pursuer, you should kill them first, right? It's like a self-defense, but even if you were a bystander and you were seeing that, there would be the law of rodef, that we stop the person who is about to murder the other person. Right? That's rodef. So Rambam says that what the doctor is doing in the case of abortion, where it's makasha leila, the woman is in dire straits, is the doctor is acting in the capacity of killing a rodef, because we have this pursuer who is the baby, who is threatening the life of the mother, and to save that life of the mother, says the Rambam, we would have to kill that pursuer, the baby. Now, some of the commentaries struggle with the Rambam's position. Because if you're going to say like the Rambam, so Rashi makes sense. Before the baby is born, lav nefesh hu, it's not a person. So once the head pops out, then it's a person, and then it's equal footing, so we can't kill the baby over the mother, because, right? But according to the Rambam, if you're going to say it's pursuer, then what difference does it make before or after? Afterwards, once the head's popped out, it's still a rodef. Even at that point, the mission should say, kill the baby. What we call infanticide. But that should be the halacha. As an aside, talking of infanticide for this week's parsha, at the end of this week's parsha, Rabbi Sachs, of blessed memory, has a great interpretation of the Akedah. Abraham is told to sacrifice his child, Yitzchak, and at the last second, the 11th hour, he's told, stop. Says Rabbi Sachs, we focus on Abraham passing the test of will he sacrifice his son. He said, no, we missed the point. That wasn't the test. That was the easy part. The test was at the end of the story where God says, stop. Why? Because in ancient times, infanticide was permissible. I created this baby, my body. I own this baby, not just as a fetus, beyond. I made this person. And God's point to Abraham at that 11th hour is, no, stop. No, you don't own this person. This is a person. You're a person. You're both children of mine. And you have no right. And that, says Rabbi Sachs, was the message of the Akedah to the world that Abraham was meant to impart with this new monotheistic tradition, a monotheistic idea, that everybody is created in the image of God and infanticide is forbidden. But if we're going with the Rambam's logic here, that a rodef we should kill, then kill the rodef even once the head has popped out into this world. So it's dealt with in a couple of ways. So Reb Chaim Brisker, who is known as a great defender of the Rambam from the Brisker Lithuanian yeshiva of Volozhin, 19th century, he says that Rambam's idea is based on the Talmud Yerushalmi, that says that the only time you're to kill someone, if they are a rodef, they're pursuing, is if you know for sure who's doing the pursuing. If you see two people fighting and you can't tell who's who, then there's no law of rodef. Here we have two real people. When I had the baby in the womb, inside the mother versus the mother that I can see, and this, right? That, he says, is clearer. Now that I have two people that I'm seeing in front of me, it's not clear who's threatening whose life. And he says that's why we don't have the category of rodef anymore. Rav Moshe Feinstein, 20th century, late 20th century, Lower East Side, says, no, the logic is a little different. He says, whenever you have two unequal claims, then the one who has a greater claim to life, that's who we err in favor of. So right now, I know that the mother is alive. The baby is only alive because the mother is keeping the baby alive. In the absence of the mother right now, the baby wouldn't be alive, right? It's being sustained inside the mother's womb. Once the baby is outside, then they have more or less equal claims to life, and we have no reason to favor mother over baby. And Rav Moshe uses the same logic when he was asked in the 70s about conjoined twins, that if we separate them, only one of them is going to survive, and one of them apparently had greater chance of survival, and he said that's the one that we choose because they have healthier organs. Even though imagine how what crazy decision this has to be for the parents. I bring the example here. We have somebody who, reality TV, conjoined twins. One of them got married to this young man sometime in the past couple of years. The other one's not married but lives with them, but they're conjoined twins. And so these are real issues, and Rav Moshe used the same principle, that we save the one, thank God here they're both well, but in the case where only one of them can survive unless we stop one of them, then we take the one with the greater chance of survival, and that's what happens with the mother and the fetus. The second issue that certain authorities, certain commentators question the position of the Rambam about rodef, that this is an issue around a pursuer, is in order to commit a crime, you have to be what we call bardas. You have to be an adult, right? If a child commits a crime, we send them to juvie. They don't have the same level of magnitude. Sometimes we try to try them if they're late in their teens and try to try them as an adult. But a little kid, it's a lot more complicated, even in our own justice system. And so if that's true of a child, then can you call a fetus a rodef? There's no intentionality there. You have to assume some sort of intentionality to say that crime is being committed and I'm killing somebody for committing a crime. And so some of the commentators aren't so comfortable with Rambam's position that that's why we are terminating in the case of rodef. Okay, the next issue, and then we'll pull all these pieces together. And I promise you, I won't go past 8 o'clock. And please God, we will have time for questions as well before then. The next thing we need to know is a debate in the Talmud as to, and this is explicit, Uba yerech imoy, is the fetus a limb of the mother, or Uba lav yerech imoy, the fetus is not a limb of the mother, right? Is it my body or is it not my body? That's explicit in the Talmud. Now, it has ramifications. We're not talking about termination. We said that the Talmud already told us that basically termination is a sin, even though it's not murder. And we'll get to, we still need to unpack that because it's not going to be hard and fast. For example, we've seen already an example when we do terminate, in the case of a mother that is struggling in labor and dire straits. Right? But even before we get there, we have this debate as to whether it's considered a limb. Now, I need practical ramifications because everything in Jewish law, we don't talk in the luft. We don't talk academically, is it not, this is some sort of nice discussion. No, it has ramifications. What are the ramifications? First one, most of it revolves around a woman who is converting to Judaism and the status of the baby in her womb as she's converting. Does the baby convert along with the woman? Is the baby considered Jewish on account of the mother? Here's how that plays out in terms of ramifications. The first one you need to know is when someone goes to mikveh, you can't have a chatzitza, anything that is separating between yourself and the mikveh water. And so if you're going to say that this baby is converting somehow independently, right, it's its own entity, what we do know for sure is that afterwards the baby doesn't need to go to mikveh again. Right? We know that the law is the baby doesn't need to go to mikveh again. This has been the mikveh part of the conversion. But first of all, we need to know the mechanism. Right? So if the woman's converting and it's a limb of hers, fine, we get that. So there was no problem. And because until the baby was born, it was part of the mother, and now it's an extension of the mother once the baby is born and already converted. What about if the baby is not part of the mother? And yet we say the baby doesn't need to go to mikveh again. So what's the mechanism there? Well, sages explained in the Talmud that anytime we have an interspersing separation between my skin and the mikveh water, it's problematic unless it's normal, right? Unless it's the normal way. So I'll give you a practical example that happens often, right? A kala, a bride, wants to go to mikveh the night before her wedding, and she's already done her nails, and she's got gel nails, and she's got, right? And it's problematic. Normally, when a woman goes to mikveh on a monthly basis, she makes sure that there's no interspersing substances. So the contemporary halakhic authorities say, most rule that that's normal. That looks like my nail, and that's the way I wear my nails. It's not dirt. On the contrary, I'm doing it to beautify, and so it's not considered an interspersing substance between the woman and the mikveh water. The same way the sages in the Talmud say, this is the normal way that this fetus is living right now. It's not interspersed. This is the nail polish, the shell of the baby is this mother and womb, and so there's no interspersion. This baby went to mikveh the way that it lives. All right. So we know now the mechanism, even if the baby is a separate entity, how the mikvah worked. Again, if it was part of the mother, we didn't have a question. If it was a separate entity, then we're resolved by saying there was no chatzitza, no interspersing, because that was normal. But here's where we're going to get dicey. Because when someone converts, let's talk about, we're going to have ramifications for boys and girls. Boy baby, girl baby. When a man converts, he needs to have a bris. And it's a two-step process. Woman converts, the one-step process nowadays. I mean, in temple times there's also a sacrifice, but nowadays it's really one-step process for a woman. She goes to mikveh. Man, two-step process, mikveh and bris. So when the baby is born, who was in the mother's tummy, who converted, the mother's womb, is this baby, if the baby was part of the mother for the conversion, and now only once he is born, he is a separate human being, then he's already Jewish the moment he came out of his mother's womb. But if he converted along with his mother, right, and he went to mikveh the same time she went to mikveh, albeit, with this encloaked by her, but it was a separate entity, then that means that when he's born, he's not Jewish. He still has to have a bris. Right? All babies are going to have a bris. The question is going to be, all baby boys are going to have a bris. The question is that bris just what a Jewish baby does? Or is that bris effectuating the conversion? What's the ramification? Can you do it on Shabbos? If the baby was born on Shabbos and the 8th day is now Shabbos, if it is a regular bris because the baby's already Jewish, then yeah, we do on Shabbos. We don't do a conversion bris on Shabbos because there's no reason that a bris should override Shabbos unless it's for a baby that is Jewish. If this baby is not yet Jewish, then we wouldn't have bris on Shabbos. So there's going to be ramifications depending on which way we look at it, whether this baby was born of a Jewish mother or was Jewish at the time of immediately when as with the mother, or only became Jewish when they became independently went through the process. The other ramification for a girl is we know that a Cohen may not marry a convert. So this baby, now a Cohen can marry the daughter of a convert, so is this baby a convert or is it the daughter of a convert? Did she herself undergo conversion alongside the mother? Or was the mother converted and when she was born to a Jewish mother? Right, so we're going to have, again, ramifications as to whether this fetus is part of the mother or a separate entity. Okay. Chavos Rabbi Yair Bacharach in the 17th century, he says that, see, we still don't know. We know that the Talmud tells us that abortion is a sin. We know that it's not murder. And so what is it? What is it? What category does it fit into? It has to fit somewhere into our Torah framework of something. What's the category? So Rabbi Bacharach suggests that it is on the same level as onanism, right, of wasting seed. Right? It's something that is problematic. We don't waste seed because that seed is life, but it's not murder. Right? It's its own midway. It's the path to life. Right? So here we have the story of Er and Onan, a few parashas time, where Judah marries his older son Er off to Tamar, and Tamar is so beautiful that he doesn't want to diminish her beauty in any way by getting her pregnant, and so he spills his seed, and God takes him prematurely. So based on this idea, our sages kind of derive, more in the Kabbalistic tradition, that while there might not be capital punishment by the earthly Beth Din, right, still God keeps his account, and it's a bad thing. Right? It's not spelled out in like Shulchan Aruch, code of Jewish law, that this is problematic the way, but it's considered something, especially in the Kabbalistic tradition, that is, that has great ramifications. He then gives his next son, Onan, who does the levirate marriage, and the same thing happens. He then holds off before giving his third son, Shelah, and it's at that time that Tamar says, okay, enough already, and disguises herself, and she ends up cohabiting with Yehuda. Right, so that's the story we'll read in a few weeks' time. But what we derive from that story is that onanism, wasting seed, is problematic. And about Bacharach, when he wants to put terminating a pregnancy into the equation, he says it's the same kind of thing. It's a sin, it's not murder, but it's a sin. So depending on our perspective, and there are varying perspectives on the gravity of wasting seed. So that puts it also at varying degrees of, how egregious is it? It's something we should be aware of. But there, again, ramifications. There are opinions based on this Chavos Jar that say that if we do need to terminate a pregnancy for whatever reason, then we should have a female doctor do it. Why? Because females don't have the prohibition of the wasting seed of onanism. It's a prohibition that's incumbent upon men. And so if this is the category that it falls under, then it should be performed by a female who doesn't have the prohibition. Right? It's an interesting perspective. Okay, another case in the Talmud. You have a woman on death row. She's about to be executed. She's pregnant. The baby didn't do anything. Does the baby deserve to die? The baby didn't commit a crime, but the baby's part of the mother. Says the Talmud that we execute her with the baby unless she's in labor. If she's on the birthing table, we're not talking that the baby's already emerged, but if she's at that stage, right, what we would call very late term, then at that point, the baby's entitled to live. We wait until she gives birth before we do the execution. So this is also, it's going to muddy the waters a little. It made things, in a good way, probably made things a little more nuanced. That, wait a sec, we do wait for this baby. Until now we said there was only once the baby emerged that it's a separate entity. No, now we're saying, baby didn't emerge yet, but there's something happening inside that now places this baby into a different category. The nafka min of the ramification is going to be that until then, it's not that. So what are we talking about?
Because now the mother is not being threatened. The baby is threatened by the mother, not the mother.
That's a really good point. That's an excellent point. Yeah, I'm not sure that the person can frame it like that. That's really interesting. It's a great way of seeing it. So Rabbi Moshe Brzezinski, 19th century Lithuania, says that what we see from this piece of the Talmud is that the only time, what do we define as late-term abortion or late term of a pregnancy, is when the baby is its own entity, could survive on its own, was at a stage where it has its own identity as a person, to the extent that it doesn't deserve this capital punishment. And so there seems to be a category here that recognizes a distinction between earlier in the term and late term, something that we didn't consider until now. And according to Reb Chaim Ozer, who says that when the Rambam called this baby a rodef and said, kill the baby, so Reb Chaim Ozer feels that earlier in the, but otherwise, if there's no rodef situation, there's no pursuer situation, then the Rambam would say forbidden. Reb Chaim Ozer says that based on this Gemara, the Rambam would say early in the term, it's not even up for discussion. Earlier in the term, you could, because that's not what we're talking about. You can only enter into rodef realm when the baby is at a stage of rodef realm because it has its own life. Before it has life, before it's considered a person, then there's no reason to assume that the Rambam would forbid it at that point. How late? Rabbi Yitzchak Zilberstein, contemporary halakhic authority in Israel, says that, okay, it seems that, if it's definitely late term to the extent that the baby could survive in some way on its own without the mother, and even that is subsequently debated. Do we mean with medical assistance? At that point, it would be problematic. But before then, it would seem, according to Reb Chaim Ozer, that the baby has no chance of survival on its own, right? Whether that be with medical help or independent of the mother, then it would seem, according to Reb Chaim Ozer's understanding of the Gemara, that it would be permitted. Another piece, another source. This is straight out of the Torah. Torah says if two men are fighting, wrestling, I gave some wrestling. It seems like I got flying fellas and more than one pick here, and I realized that afterwards. You've got two men wrestling, fighting, and a woman comes over to stop the fight and gets in the middle of it all and miscarries. The Torah says that she has to pay, she has to compensate, the fellow who made her miscarry has to compensate, has to give money for her loss. So our sages, or the Yad Ramah, medieval commentator, says, well, from here we see then that it's not in the category of murder, it's some sort of civil case. If it were murder, then we have a rule that we don't give kofel l'nafshay, right? As opposed to certain other religions where you can give blood money, and no, we don't do that, right? There's no getting out. You can't pay a fine to alleviate the crime. If we're insisting that the perpetrator pay a fine, that means that there's no murder. That means straight black and white in the Torah, no Talmud, no nothing, that we see that this is not a person. So what is it then? You're paying a fine because you've wounded the person, right? Anytime you can have a civil case for an assault, right, whether intentional or unintentional, you can make restitution for that. But when does that happen? We don't make restitution for killing someone, but we do make restitution for wounding someone. So this would be considered wounding this mother of part of her body. So what's important at this point is to understand that even the words that are used of my body, my choice, that doesn't fit within the realm when we start talking about what's permissible. Because even if it's in the realm of only wounding, not killing, self-harm is also prohibited by the Torah. So, for example, euthanasia is forbidden, but any type, if somebody would, self-mutilate, we have a concept that says that someone who wounds themselves, it's forbidden to wound yourself unnecessarily, intentionally. And so even if abortion is only a wound, it would still be forbidden, because it's not my body, my choice. God's body, not my choice. So when are we allowed to engage in chavala, in wounding? So our sages tell us, and this is kind of logical, intuitive, when it is derech tikkun, when you're wounding in order to be able to repair, such as surgery. Right? What are the surgeons doing? They're wounding people, they're sticking a knife in them. Stick a knife in a person. Answer is chavala, it's wounding, derech tikkun. So some of the authorities look at this as an example. Once we have said the chavala is permissible, the wounding is permissible if it's in a way of repairing. So if the mother is in a very difficult situation, we don't know what that is yet, we'll see some practical examples, then it would seem that it's permissible. Because it's only on the level of chavala, right? We never say murder is okay if it's going to fix, because it can't fix. But wounding could, so what do we mean by that? So I will tell you the biggest issue that comes up, unfortunately, sadly, tragically, is a woman who develops a tumor during pregnancy. And she has to undergo chemo. And to subject her to chemo would mean it would have terrible, terrible ramifications for the baby. If the baby survived, the baby would not have a nice life. And so what do you do? What do you do? At this point, it's not like the baby is rodef, is pursuing, it's the tumor that's pursuing. So why should the baby now be terminated to save the mother's life? So answer of Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, again, late 20th century Jerusalem, he says what the baby's doing here is standing in the way of the cure. So that's kind of like rodef, it's like a passive rodef, right? So the mother's life can't be saved because the baby is in the way, that's also like rodef. So based on that, contemporary poskim will try to urge the mother. It's a very, very difficult conversation to have, but great rabbis who deal with these cases will try to sensitively urge the mother, for the baby's sake and your own sake, you have to save your life, you have to undergo the chemo, and you have to terminate the pregnancy first. And think about how painful that can be. A parent who maybe had trouble getting pregnant, and after that to be told by the rabbi, terminate the pregnancy and do the chemo, it's painful. Okay, Rav Unterman, early chief rabbi of Israel, was asked the question of what's known as the Nazi rape case. A Nazi officer raped a Jewish woman and then didn't want to have a Jewish child, and so instructed the Jewish doctor to terminate the pregnancy. So the question came to Rav Unterman, and the doctor, I'm not sure, it's probably post-facto that the question came up, how should it have been dealt with? I don't know how much choice we had when it was actually happening. But from the doctor's perspective, he was worried that if somebody tells you kill someone else, it's one of the big three. Right? If somebody tells you commit adultery or murder, then you have to rather take the bullet. He says, I have a gun held to my head here to terminate this pregnancy because this is what this Nazi wants. And so Rav Unterman said, no, it's not. It's because we see it's not on the level of murder. We've brought the proof, we've seen it all in the Talmud. It's not on the level of murder, so certainly in that case, terminate the pregnancy. Don't take the bullet over that. Adultery case. This is the strongest, heaviest case that it's going to blow your mind when you know that Rabbi Yaakov Emden, great 17th, 18th century Talmudist, universal acceptance, there was a case that was brought to him of adultery where the baby would have been, for the rest of its life, a mamzer, because it was born of a mother who had an affair with someone who wasn't her husband. And based on what we saw in the previous slide, I'm just going to take you back again, where we saw that it's saving a mother and even this child from a dire situation, he allowed, in the case of a mamzer, to have the pregnancy terminated. And that was how major it was, even though it's not a physical thing. So of course on a physical level, the Tzitz Eliezer is most famous for having the position for, mother understands the baby is going to have to live with Tay-Sachs. And there are other conditions as well that I don't want to get too detailed now because it gets dicier what we're talking about. But the Tzitz Eliezer says, based on that undue strain on the mother and the baby, he allows abortion. Now, what's that based on? When we think, what's worse? And I apologize, I am kind of looking like I'm going to run the clock here, so maybe afterwards the questions will be after I run the clock. I will finish by 8. So when Hanan, Mishael, and Azariah, who were like the friends of Daniel, one of my favorite prophets, they're thrown into the fiery furnace by Nebuchadnezzar. They walk in and they walk out unscathed. Beautiful. We admire them, they're our heroes, they're wonderful. Says the Tosfos commenting on this story in the Talmud, all well and good. They were thrown in and had to give their lives for God. What if they were tortured? Would they have been so willing? Imagine living a life of torture. And the Tosfos concludes from here, and this is for a different discussion when we think about, it will come up when we discuss marijuana, medical marijuana. Torture is worse than death. And so the notion of killing this baby who has to live with Tay-Sachs and the family and everything versus, what's worse? Right? So it's not so simple that, yes, murder is terrible, but killing isn't murder, and sometimes torture is worse than being killed. Okay, bottom line. So Rav Moshe Feinstein was hardcore on this. Right? He very rarely permitted an abortion. His position was that the Rambam says it's only in the case of Rodef that the baby's threatening the life of the mother right now, and anything else is not permissible. The Tzitz Eliezer, Rabbi Eliezer Waldenberg, contemporary of his, said that no, it's not murder in any way, it's not killing, it's only chavala, right? That it's just wounding. It's just wounding the mother, and therefore he allowed a much more expansive permissibility, right? This is a universally accepted Orthodox rabbi, right? Who a contemporary of Rav Moshe on that level. And he allowed it in cases like Tay-Sachs and in other cases to be able to say that if there's great pain, yeah, then it's only wounding. And right, obviously we learned that it was really, really late term that everybody would agree. But until that really, really late term, right, the Tzitz Eliezer would have allowed it. The contemporary halachic authority on this today is Rav Asher Weiss, original American, now he's in Israel, and he laments his role that he knows. He gets called by all sorts of people that shouldn't be calling him, because they know him, he's the abortion rabbi. He's universally accepted, but everybody knows that he follows the position of Tzitz Eliezer. So imagine, it's your own daughter, your own granddaughter, your own, suddenly somebody who's so hardcore, suddenly when it's your own, you become maybe a little less hardcore, and you know that Rav Asher Weiss is universally accepted, and he's the man to call who will say it's okay. But the key thing that we need to remember is that according to all opinions, including Rav Asher Weiss and Tzitz Eliezer, we don't do abortions just because. And some of what we're hearing the rhetoric around is, yeah, my body, my choice, it's all okay, it's fine, no worries. That is never any of the categories that we've encountered here. Right? So if somebody had a baby out of wedlock, we didn't have a category that said that. We had the category of adultery, where the baby is going to have to suffer because it was the baby would be a mamzer, but you don't become a mamzer. Some people think that illegitimate is synonymous with mamzer. It's not. Mamzer only happens, that bastard child only happens when it is from a forbidden relationship, but not a non-married relationship. And so simply a baby that came from a union of two single people, or there doesn't seem to be much leeway there. In cases of rape, no doubt we can rely on various, all the way from Rabbi Yaakov Emden to Rav Unterman, right? So the egregious cases where there's going to be suffering that's caused, then there is what to rely upon. But we have to always remember that in Judaism, marriage, the act of marital intimacy is sacred. It's bringing life into the world, and we treat life very seriously. We honor life, and we're not callous and careless about our conversations around life. Life is meaningful, and it's only the exceptions that we're dealing with here, the gray areas of exception, but not to simply say blanket. Yes, there is blanket, but blanket in certain camps, Orthodox, traditional, accepted universally, but only blanket within the realm of other factors that are coming into play. Ultimately, it's a gift of life, that we as human beings have the ability to be imitatio Dei, to emulate God, to create life, to bring life into this world, connect heaven and earth. Thank you all for being part of this inaugural lecture, and look forward to seeing everybody in future weeks.